has different, zoning districts and, different areas with different feels. So you can't copy and paste exactly, but the performance standards in there I thought were fairly representative of a lot of the ordinances I've seen, a lot of the model ordinances for solar that I've looked at. So I thought it was a good representation of just to get an idea of what one of these looks like, and to get a feel for the different standards and types of review that are required for these. Well, this works because now I can just present from the screen share.
Does this work for you?
Yep.
Got it? Are you doing this? Okay.
Well, the presentation's over, so that was it.
Then. All right.
All right, you can go to the first slide. Thanks.
That one?
Yep.
Okay.
So just first off, I wanted to just mention why it's important to have a land use, an actual land use, like in our table of land uses, to represent, these kind of solar projects and identifying solar energy systems as a use itself. Currently, there isn't anything in our land use ordinance or our table of uses that matches what these projects are, and it makes the permitting process for both staff and the applicants more difficult than it needs to be, because staff were trying to relate what the project is to the next closest thing, and there just isn't anything really that comes that close. So by creating an actual land use for solar, energy systems of varying scales, you're able to create review criteria to look at these projects in the best way. So if you don't have a specific land use and specific standards geared towards that use, and you're using just really general standards, then you often come into a situation where you might be allowing a project to go through with a limited review, where you're not reviewing things properly because you haven't identified those specific areas of interest, or you're putting too much focus on certain review criteria that don't necessarily apply to the project. So that can kind of hurt on the applicant side, because you're making them submit materials and information that don't really apply to the project. So creating a specific use really helps with that. So takes us on to this slide, defining what the use is. You don't want to just create a single line in the table of uses that says solar panels or solar energy systems or whatever, because there's such a varying degree in the scale from someone putting a few panels on their roof as an accessory use to their home, to a large multi-acre solar farm that's dealing more on a commercial basis. So the ordinance would be really aimed at addressing both, although obviously the commercial larger scale facilities are mainly where the majority of the review would come into play. So it's common, it seems, that most ordinances and model ordinances I've looked at, the basic, defining factors are roof mounted versus ground mounted. So roof mounted are generally an accessory use to whatever the principal use of the structure is, whereas ground mounted might be an accessory use. It might be in the backyard of a home, or it could be, you know, those large scale facilities where that's the only thing on the lot. So then once you've narrowed that down, you get to kind of the scale of the system, and that could be based on either the square footage of the arrays, or it could be based on the capacity that it generates. So on the table on the right, it seems a lot of ordinances use both. It seems that they use the square footage to actually classify the small, medium, or large, but then they associate a general capacity with that square footage. So the table on the right kind of shows two examples, the Belfast ordinance being the one that you've actually have, but I also put Portland's here as well. And I looked at a few others. The numbers are varying, to say the least. I looked at one that was a few years older than either of these, I think, and the numbers were way different. And I imagine that's a result of the technology changing and becoming more efficient, where a smaller amount of space can generate more power. But this is kind of the first area that I really want to look more into, and probably reach out to someone with more technical knowledge than myself on solar, to kind of figure out what the relationship is between square footage, the capacity it can generate, and how going forward we can kind of time proof the ordinance language so it doesn't become outdated, you know, every couple years. You can move on. So the next thing that you consider after kind of splitting the land use up into these, you know, 6 different types, you know, roof or ground mounted, and then small, medium, or large in scale, would be to consider the review and permitting authority for each type. So if you look at the extremes, it makes sense that a small scale roof mounted, you know, system where you might just be an accessory, you know, really small accessory use on a residential rooftop, you know, it makes sense that that might just be a permit through the code officer. Whereas a large scale, you know, Belfast is talking large scale is over 4 acres of area, that, you know, one of those would be site plan review through the planning board. But it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be the same across every zoning district. You know, like one of these tables would basically apply to each zoning district. So for instance, a medium scale ground mounted system might require site plan review in, you know, the MDR or commercial 2 or some denser district, whereas in the low density or the forest and agriculture, where there's bigger lots and things are more spread out, maybe it's okay for that to be a permit through the code officer. So on the extremes, it's fairly easy to imagine what the review level should be, but as you kind of get in the middle and you look at the intent of the zoning districts, you might start to have more discussion about you know, which entity you want reviewing the project and permitting it. You can move on.
So Kyle, would you, because Belfast like divides their, you know, their permitted uses by divisions. Do you see this as, would you divide the permitted uses by Orono's zoning? Like mediums, you know, medium density.
Right.
I mean,
so the way we have,
you would divide it up like that, like they did.
so yeah, our ordinance is, the layout is a little different than theirs, which is what I was saying. You can't quite just copy and paste it. So
Right.
they kind of, they list each zoning district on its own and then say, these are the uses that are allowed in that zoning district. Whereas we have a single table that has columns for zoning district and rows of land uses. So in the rows, you would have, you know, ground mounted solar systems, small, medium, and large, and then roof mounted, small, medium, and large. And then each one of those would say a P or an S, or just not allowed at all in
Okay.
each one of the zoning districts. So that's how I was imagining it.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
So,
So
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I see you're going ahead, and that very first slide that you showed with the small, medium, large, and the definitions were quite different between Portland and Belfast.
yes.
And so is that because in Portland, they're pretty much having just roof mounted and they don't have the kind of acreage in the city that Belfast would have? Because Belfast was going up to 4 acres.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's something I want to look into more. I plan on contacting some of the different departments to see their basis for their, you know, why they chose the numbers they chose. If it had to do with, yeah, the built environment of the cities, or if it had to do with the, you know, the year in which the ordinances were created, and if
You had
there were any
mentioned
changes. Yeah.
the year and sort of the differences of the technology. So that
Yeah.
would be interesting to find out which years theirs were put in also, their ordinance
Right.
came.
Right. Yeah.
But
So that's, yeah.
I'm just surprised to see such a great difference in the sizes.
Yeah, and like I said, you know, I looked at a couple that were even farther away from each other. So, yeah, I want to see if there was a basis, you know, what the logic was for choosing those, if it was based on the individual communities, or if it was more just a arbitrary number picked, you know, that they felt was right, and then, you know, see how that relates to the community here, and, you know, which kind of style that would suit Orono the best.
Thank you.
Sure. So after, you know, establishing, you know, defining the use and, you know, saying what zoning districts they're allowed in, and, you know, the type of review that each, you know, use would have to go through. The next step in this is really to look at the performance standards, you know, which are the criteria which all these projects would be reviewed on. You know, whether it's by code office or planning board, the performance standards, unless specified, you know, only for the planning board, the performance standards apply to all projects, regardless of the permitting authority. So one of the next couple of slides are just going through some of the big standards that kind of pop up in all of the ordinances on this that I looked at. There are obviously others, but I think these were the main ones that draw the most conversation. Height can be regulated in a couple different ways. So this is looking mostly at roof-mounted systems. So we already have a maximum building height in all of our zoning districts. In most residential districts, it's 35 feet, and in the commercial districts, it's, you know, 45 feet, and can go up to 50 with site plan approval, I think. So you can either include the solar, you know, the systems within that max building height and require that they stay under that, you know, maximum height, or you can create an additional standard that says, you know, if you have a single family home, it can be 35 feet, and then you're allowed to go an additional, you know, whatever, 3-5 feet for a roof mounted solar array. So that would be, you know, just one conversation to have if people thought that having those panels and arrays go above the maximum building height established in the town was acceptable. As far as setbacks go, again, I've seen, model ordinances recommend both ways of, we have side, rear, and front setback requirements already for every zoning district. So you can either, state that, a commercial, a solar system, even if it's a principal use, there's no building on the lot necessarily. It's just that the use of the lot is specifically for a solar farm. It just meets the setback requirements of the district. So maybe that's 20 feet on the front and rear and 10 feet on the sides. Or if people felt it was warranted that they be set back a little further, you could increase that setback to a different number. I think I saw in the Belfast ordinance that they had a 50-foot setback in certain cases. Maybe for the larger scale systems, you don't want people to be able to see them from the street or to kind of wander onto the area where those arrays are. So you want it set back a little further. That requires a little more digging on my end and talking with other communities who have implemented these and have projects to see what sorts of issues, if any, have arisen, and if there's based on that feedback, then it would be easier to make that decision. So the next performance standard comes up a lot is screening and buffering and vegetation management in general. We already have screening and buffering standards in our ordinance, but this would obviously be specific to this. Again, it would probably most likely be for the larger scale or the medium large scale projects where it was the principal use of the lot. If you wanted those screened from view so people on the road couldn't kind of look in to see it, or if it was in a residential neighborhood or bordering on a residential neighborhood, you can use screening and buffering standards to kind of soften the visual impact on the surrounding area. Some ordinances require a vegetation management plan just to sort of preserve the vegetated surface on the lot to the maximum extent possible. So making sure that the system is laid out efficiently when it comes to kind of environmental concerns, and yet you're not creating more impervious cover than is needed. Next, lot coverage. Again, like the building height, we already have a lot coverage standard in our ordinance. In general, in most zoning districts, you can't have more than 1/3 of the lot covered in buildings or structures. But whether or not that you want to consider, one, you have to determine if you want to consider these solar projects in that same way. Do you want that 1/3 building lot coverage standard to apply to these types of projects, or do you think it's acceptable for a larger area to be covered? And two, there's two ways that ordinances kind of calculate coverage when it comes to these bigger solar energy systems. Some calculate the coverage by the surface area of the arrays themselves, which is obviously a much bigger number because you're taking all of the tops of the arrays that aren't necessarily touching the ground, and you're using that to calculate the square footage. Or you can just use the actual impervious surface generated on the ground and where the arrays are actually connected to the ground. You can use that as the kind of metric for determining the lot coverage. So I think either way is acceptable, to use the surface area of the arrays or the actual impervious coverage on the ground. It's just that the number that you come up with is going to be different because the surface area of the arrays is always going to be a larger area than the impervious cover generated actually on the ground.
You might be able to use a percentage of the surface area.
Sure.
If you could make some calculations as to what on the average that would be, which would make it certainly simpler to administer.
Right. Yeah, I think that's definitely something to consider. Final performance standards, that I wanted to point out were decommissioning for systems that reach, the end of their life or are abandoned. Most of these ordinances put in some sort of standards to deal with those situations. They generally provide a time period for the operator or the owner to dismantle and remove this system. And then at that point, the operator would submit to either the code officer or the planning board a plan that would kind of detail how the system was going to be removed, so as to not create any impacts on the ground. And then for those larger projects, like we have for subdivisions or kind of bigger site plans, upfront, the applicant providing a performance guarantee for the cost of the removal of the system. If for some reason they abandon it and choose not to remove it on their own, then the town would have the financial capacity to take care of that process. And last is something that comes up sometimes and seems to be a little of a question mark, is the issue of glare. So in general, we have a glare standard already in our ordinance, but it's not very specific, and it's more of an after the fact type thing rather than considering it up front. So solar panels are obviously meant to absorb light, not reflect light. So from a lot of things I've read, it seems that, in general, like glass windows or snow cover can often reflect more light than a solar panel would. But at the same time, it seems like it's fairly simple to still take, some necessary precautions of taking the chance of, creating glare onto neighboring properties or roadways that would cause, a nuisance or a hazard for people. So prioritizing the placement of, of the system on, a couple of slides ago, I think I mentioned, encouraging the placement of these systems on the side and the rear of lots. So that would obviously be for situations where you had a principal use, a structure already existing. So just like we do with parking, we encourage it on the side and the rear so that you don't have that visual impact of the parking in front of an existing structure, whether it's a store or an apartment building or whatever. This would be something similar, where if it's possible, you would encourage the operator to locate it in a place where it's less likely to cause issues for the surrounding area. So finally, I wanted to see what other issues, if any, when I start to do this draft language or reach out to other communities for feedback on what they've experienced. Is there anything else that you'd like focused on or questions you'd like answered? And then obviously I want to continue to do more research, reaching out to people with more technical expertise, reaching out to communities that have these existing ordinances to get feedback from them, and then start the draft the actual ordinance language.
Can I ask just a kind of in general question? If
Sure.
a resident installs a solar panel, is that considered a home improvement? And do you need to go get a permit to do this? Is it like a
Yes.
putting an addition on your house, does it increase the value of your house if you've got solar panels? I mean, at this point, I guess. I'm just curious what that means when people start
Well,
looking at alternative forms of energy.
Kyle, this is like really the we're at the very front end of it. I think we can get that answer, definitely. I kind of would look at that as an energy efficiency type thing. So if I put a heat pump in my house, it's probably not going to increase it. It's just kind of an energy option, but definitely we can, Kyle can look at that. I think right now, presentation wise, is to kind of put it out there. These are obviously the first time in this. We're just kind of like really touching up on, looking at it. And I think Belfast was a great example. If you read that, it really kind of is kind of a community that would be something that was like ours. So there's going to be a lot going on, and all the questions you can ask about it while Kyle goes through this. But Kyle, I think you did a great job of kind of giving us the first step. And this is going to take a little bit of time, but so thanks.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Dave. You can...
No, Terry, if you prefer, if you want to give me 15 to 20 seconds, I can answer Cheryl's question because it has been brought up and we've actually been looking into stuff like that.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
The answer is that we've talked with realtors looking to see whether it's increasing the value of the house or not. There's no market information that's showing that it's actually increasing it. It's sort of like whether you paint it brown or whether you paint it white. It might impact how fast it sells, but there is no direct value. The second thing is that by its nature of what it is an accessory structure. It is subject to taxes under personal property. Unfortunately, the legislature passed a law last year that exempted these from personal property tax. So we don't get any value from that as directly from that we would from some other piece of equipment.
Yeah.
But it has been, it is something that everyone's looking into, is to find out. And I guess I would say that it's important because you're looking at those balances between, the environmental benefits and the cost benefits. So we've been trying to figure out will the value of the house go up because of that? And what we're finding is that there is no, right now, there doesn't appear to be any direct correlation between an increased value in solar panels.
Okay, yeah, I was curious as we get started on this if there's an economic impact as well. So, yeah, thank you.
I would say there's an economic impact, but as I've said to Sophie, it's probably a negative economic impact, not a positive one.
Kyle, I do have one question.
Sure.
Do we envision the possibility of operators of these solar systems owning and or leasing the properties where they're installing them?
I've seen language in the ordinance for both situations. I think that's why it'll specify owner or operator. But yeah, as far as a percentage of, which way it leans, I'm not sure. It's something I can try to find out when I reach out to different communities to see which is more common. Dave, if you have more about
Yeah, like I said, from an economic development standpoint, Tom, we've certainly been looking into that because I've been spending the last year, 18 months trying to attract these types of facilities into it before I realized that the legislature had changed the law to make them tax exempt. So the answer is that they're usually the larger ones are on leased land. If it's not, if it's a company there's several companies that are around leasing lands. I do know we have one that I've learned of in Orono already that they have an option to lease a property specifically for what I call a solar farm, a commercial solar operation. you're kind of limited as to where these can go. Orono is well located for where a commercial program can go, because these can't just tap into the larger ones. These commercial facilities can't just tap into your single phase line going by your house.
Yeah.
They have to tap into a substation. And so, or at least there has to be able to put it into a 3-phase power transmission line. We've got a very good location for a lot of different properties that could meet that requirements. That's why they're looking at Orono versus some other communities. But they are 100% of the ones I've been dealing with from an economic development standpoint have been looking for leased land.
Leased land. That's what I would have thought.
And what would a medium scale solar project be for? Like I can see a small scale for a house and a larger scale for commercial use, but what's the medium? What would that be? Just to power?
It's typically, it's one that has a high electrical use need, because you can take that power, behind the meter. And so if you have it could be a hospital, it could be a large electrical user, a mill. Well, actually, it would probably be even a larger scale. But several housing complexes, apartment buildings, those kind of things that have a high electrical draw don't meet necessarily. They're going to use it themselves. They're not going to export it to the grid, and so they just have a high electrical need.
If I could just ask, I think that I would like to know if there's space near some of the apartment complexes to put in a commercial size solar panel. And I wanted to clarify, we're not regulating residential, as my understanding. It's just commercial. Residential, you go in and you get a permit. But this is more for planning board.
So, I mean, that's part of it. So the small scale roof mounted would cover those residential type projects in theory. I mean, that's how the ordinance in Belfast is written. But yeah, those smaller scale ones that would be accessory uses to residential properties would just be a permit through the code office. And yeah, a lot of those performance standards, you could write it in a way so that, they probably applied more so towards the larger scale projects where the project was the principal use of the lot, not an accessory use. So, I mean, maybe for the residential projects, if they wanted to do something on the ground, you might still want to say it be in the side or the rear of the house and not in the front yard right next to the road where it could create a glare concern. But you might not be concerned with the, as strict of a setback standard or as strict of, the screening and buffering for a couple panels on someone's roof or backyard as you would with the larger scale system. So it could apply to either, but I would envision that more of the standards would apply to the bigger principal use systems.
Again, if I can chime in, Cindy, I think Kyle's unfortunately too young to remember the 12-foot satellite dishes, but you do remember when the time period when a lot of towns were talking about, regulate even for residential uses where those 12-foot dishes could go, and a lot of times they didn't want them in the the front yards or side yards. So I think it'll be a comparable type of conversation.
So Dave, when Kyle said that, when he said, we're putting them in the front yard, I was like, oh, right beside the satellite dish. I thought about that. I am old enough to remember.
Any other thoughts? Any questions?
What else do you need, Kyle, to know?
Well, like I said, I have a lot of information I still want to look at. Reaching out to communities around here with existing projects, talking to them specifically about those, similar to what we did with the marijuana ordinance language, where we had some general idea of what the key standards and issues were, but wanted to see how in real life practice, how those uses were operating and affecting the communities, to see if some of the standards were possibly overstated, or some of them were very important. So I'd be interested next to kind of start that process.
Terry, if I could, I think what we're trying to get from the council is to, you've kind of heard a 30,000 foot version of what Kyle is looking at. Is there anything that you just think he's completely out of bounds on, or are there specific things that you haven't heard that you really want to make sure that such an ordinance incorporates? That would be great feedback for us.
Yeah,
So,
I personally feel that it's actually. Oh, Tom, go ahead. I didn't want to cut you off.
no, I was just going to say, I think very much on the right track. I like the way he presented it, and I'm sure that his additional research will flesh that out.
Thank you, Tom. And I was kind of the same thing. I was like thinking that this is where the very beginning stages. I think Kyle did a good job of kind of getting us started. I think we're going to have many questions as we progress through this. The only other additional thing that I've noticed when I did a little extra research, and I didn't see it in the Belfast one, Kyle. I don't know if I overshot it or anything, if it was there, but there's communities that are taking, like if we live here in Orono, they create a public or a group site. So say all our neighbors can have a place together, but it's off site somewhere. And just kind of keeping that in mind, that may be a thing in Orono where people all kind of do a community one outside on a piece of land.
Sure, I can look into that.
The other thing I was going to say is that we're seeing a lot of contracts in our office for leasing contracts, and a lot of them would prefer not to have performance standards, or performance bonds or performance. So it'll be interesting to see if you can find out from towns if they're actually getting those, because they seem to be balking at it from the landlord perspective.
Cindy, I can tell you that I had asked Bill to reach out on his network. The code enforcement officers have a program called Moose Chatter, where code enforcement officers can ask questions around. And just this last week, I was asking a question specifically about about solar. And the one thing that I saw back on the most responses throughout the state was folks talking. I hadn't even thought of the performance bonds, but that's what I would say. Anywhere from Kittery to up here and everything in between, I would say 75% of them were saying make sure that you put the performance bond in there to ensure that it gets taken down at the end, or a line of whether it's a performance bond or a line of credit or some form of a method that. And I was thinking, gosh, that's 20 years long. I could see why they'd be not in favor of it, but it is a conversation that's being had throughout the state.
I do think the standard in the Belfast ordinance was just for their large scale systems. So, obviously that's the really big projects, but it wouldn't necessarily apply to the smaller projects where it was just, someone doing an accessory project on their business or house.
Dave,
Any other comments?
would you
Yes,
talk
ma'am.
for just a little bit about the taxable nature of this, just so counselors are aware that as they're looking at this, we're not looking at bringing a lot of tax dollars into Orono through solar?
Sure. The prior to 2019, solar energy and wind energy were considered the same as a dam, and those were fully taxable under personal property for income property taxes. In 2019, the legislature passed a bill that exempted most forms of wind and solar from personal property, made them tax exempt. It's a complicated formula. I had a conversation with Joe Sally from Maine Revenue, and he had a hard time trying to understand it as to how it fits. When it gets to a certain level, then there is small payments and such. But as a general rule, think of them as they're tax exempt, so that the property owner is not paying any property tax on those facilities when they're created within your community. And the thing that is, there's some criteria that needs to happen in order for that to meet that, but it's pretty easy to make. So what's happening is that in Orono, for example, one that just got permitted, is that it's a owner of a property who has several rental properties in town. So he wants to have one of these solar facilities on one of his properties, but he's able to take the electricity that's generated from that facility and spread it out the cost to whatever Amir is called today, for their tax bill. So he can offset the cost of all of his properties. They don't have to be just on that property. They can be literally anywhere, and they get that tax credit for it. So as Sophie said, correctly stated, if you have a facility that comes in and creates a 10-acre facility that has 500 panels on it, there is no you're not going to get any taxable value for it. I'm not sure. I didn't want to say it out loud, but I was trying to figure out how the hydro dams feel about all this, because they're still taxable, but the wind power and the solar are not. They're tax exempt. Does that adequately give you a rundown, Sophie?
And is that an incentive? Is that to incentivize solar?
Absolutely. That's what I was told from Maine Revenue Service, is that this was a governor's plan to incentivize putting these companies that are coming in and leasing the lands and putting them up. Probably some of that what Cindy was talking about. They said that was a barrier from them investing in these in the state. So the legislature said successfully passed a bill exempting it, but it was a direct correlation to incentivizing it to happen.
Anything else from fellow counselors? Okay, so moving on. The next item is citizen request, ordinance revision to allow expansion of existing self-storage units east of I-95.
I'm going to start this and then probably let Kyle take over. But some counselors may remember that council adopted ordinance language within the last few years addressing the fact that self-storage units weren't actually allowed in the ordinance. And we had two at that point. When council adopted that language, they made it so that self-storage units were only allowed in the C1 and EDZ, west of I-95. So what we have is a request from the person who owns the self-storage unit east of I-95 that is located in a C2 district. And what they're asking is that council consider a zone change that would allow him to expand and put one more unit on his parcel. So with that information, I'm going to pass the rest of it over to Kyle.
So yeah, like Sophie said, there's really two issues that come up here for that prevent this from happening. One is that the self-storage facility is east of the interstate, and two is the fact that it's in the C2 and self-storage facilities aren't allowed in the C2 in general. So normally, if there was a use in a district that was just grandfathered in, it's possible to do a contract zone or any type of zoning change just to a district that allows that use, and then the problem is solved. So in this case, you might change it from C2 to C1, but the issue is that that standard would still apply that says self-storage facilities can exist east of the interstate. So even if you changed it to a district that allows self-storage facilities, it would still be considered legally non-conforming, and non-conforming uses cannot expand. Expansions of non-conforming uses isn't allowed. So it still prevents the business from doing what they want to do. So in the document that was sent out, it was just meant as sort of informal overview of some potential options that I outlined that would potentially allow this property owner to go forward with some type of expansion. I also provided my recommendation at the end, what I thought was made the most sense from the comprehensive plan perspective, as well as had the least chance of creating problems in the future for that lot or other lots. So, just briefly going through each one, if you were to make self-storage facilities allowed in the C1 and the EDZ like they are now, but you got rid of the standard that considered it, not allowable east of the interstate, and then you switch this lot to C1 or EDZ, it would be allowed and it would be conforming. The problem is self-storage facilities would then be allowed in other areas that they're not currently allowed in town. So Godfrey Drive, that's east of the interstate, but it's all C1 and EDZ. So you'd be, that ordinance change, prevented that originally, and now you'd be opening up for that use to go in there. Also, east of the interstate on Kelly Road, that's also EDZ. So there's a few lots there where self-storage facilities could potentially go in where they're otherwise not allowed right now. Also, if you were to just change that lot on Park Street from C2 to C1 and put no additional standards in place for that lot, you're opening up that lot to be developed for any use that's allowed in the C1. The C1 is meant more as a commercial leaning towards industrial district, where the C2 is meant as a smaller scale commercial and residential district. So while a self-storage facility might not be impactful on that area, it might fit in okay. You might not want certain other commercial one or EDZ uses to go into that spot. So that's why option one, it's possible it would accomplish the sort of single goal from the applicant's perspective, but probably not the best from the town's perspective. Option two is make self-storage facilities an allowable use in the C2 district, and then again get rid of that west of the interstate standard, but potentially put in a standard that limits the total floor area of self-storage facilities in this, in the C2 or east of the interstate. So, that would allow self-storage facilities to exist in the C2. So this current facility on Park Street would become a conforming use and they would be allowed to expand. And if you put some standard in place that gave a max floor area, you would prevent self-storage facilities from becoming too large of a scale, you know, kind of east of the interstate or in the C2 area. However, it would still open up self-storage facilities to go in every other lot in the C2, which is currently not allowed. And if you look at the intent of the commercial 2 district, it doesn't, self-storage facilities, while they might not make a harmful impact on that zone, it's not really the intent of that district to allow that type of use, which is why they're currently not allowed there. It's supposed to be smaller scale commercial, retail, restaurants, and kind of mixed housing. So that brings us to, you know, the option 3, which involves kind of a 2-part ordinance change. One, you would amend the standard, you know, talking about the interstate to specify that it applies to all self-storage facilities from that date going forward, and that self-storage facilities existing before that date are allowed to exist, you know, anywhere in town. So after that, you would then have to use some mechanism to change the zone of the lot, probably a conditional use, conditional zone change, which, you know, there's a couple examples of in the town, which basically allows us to write into the ordinance specific standards like a contract zone, but it's town initiated basically. So you could change the lot to commercial 1, but put into place restrictions on it that say, you know, you're not allowed to bring, you know, more industrial uses to that spot. It would be limited to self-storage facilities, restaurants, retail stores, and other uses that are similar between the commercial 1 and commercial 2. So with that one, you wouldn't be allowing self-storage facilities to go in anywhere else where they're currently not allowed. You would simply be allowing it on that one lot, and you'd be putting restrictions in place that prevent that lot from being developed in the future and turned into something that doesn't fit in with the character of that corridor. So that's why that was my recommendation going forward, but obviously open to feedback.
So Kyle, I was actually thinking the same thing. And plus, by not setting a precedent to open anything else up, it also affords the individual the opportunity to kind of do a little expansion, but it also benefits the community for a little bit of an extra tax base, correct? From adding another structure on there, correct?
Okay. Oh, Dave, do you want to speak more to that?
Yes, it will.
Right.
I could have said that much.
Kyle,
Yep.
I didn't like option 1 or 2 at all. I
Me
think
either.
option 3 has potential. Do we have a sense that this particular lot is suitable for expansion of storage facility? I mean, I hate to go through all this and then find out, you know, that lot is really not going to work on that lot.
Yep. So I've looked at it somewhat because this has been, you know, looking at this has been sort of an ongoing thing for a while now. I think up to a certain point, there's room for expansion. You know, we talked about, you know, in the previous conversation about that lot coverage standard and, you know, structures not being able to take up more than a third of the lot. I think the lot is maybe at around 15,000 square feet of building floor area. And I want to say it was around 75,000 square feet total lot area. So there is some room, I think, for expansion there. But yeah, obviously before, that would be my next step after this would be to verify that the applicant could do specifically what they want to do before going through the actual amendment process.
So I have two questions too. What was the reason for west of the interstate? I mean, back when this was written, west of the interstate as a standard and east of the interstate.
Right, so it's not just for this use, it's for a lot of our bigger commercial uses, things like warehousing or manufacturing. West of the interstate is viewed as, there's a lot of commercial one and economic development zone west of the interstate. That's primarily where that zone is. It's all right around there, Stillwater and the interstate area. Some of it's east of it, some of it's west, but east of the interstate is viewed as like the town's, denser residential and smaller scale commercial. You have the commercial too, you have the village commercial. It's meant as more, retail, service businesses, restaurants, things like that. Whereas these larger scale commercial uses that are really industrial uses in a lot of cases, it's just that we don't have an industrial zone anywhere really except Ayers Island. So those uses were seen as being better put west of the interstate, so you could leave the area east of the interstate for that more dense kind of growth, and leave the bigger projects west.
Cheryl, I would just add on to that is the other thing that area west of the interstate is not served by municipal water and sewer, and these types of facilities are more consistent with a use that doesn't need municipal water and sewer. So that was another reason.
Yeah, well, thank you, because I was curious. And my other question is, when this changes, if this is a contract zone, right? If it's not, it wouldn't be a contract zone. It'd be
so it'd be a conditional zone. So conditional and contract zone are essentially the same thing. You're changing the zone of a single lot basically, and you're putting standards, restrictions in place on the lot. But a contract zone is initiated by the applicant, and a contract is drawn up and then signed. Whereas a conditional zone is something that we do on our end. It's just an ordinance change, and we write it into the ordinance.
So if this person wanted to leave this facility for whatever reason, it would always have to be a warehouse, right? If it goes to a conditional.
No, so we'd create a separate, more limited land use table in that section of the ordinance. So you change the lot to commercial 1, and our land use table says all these uses are allowed in the commercial 1 district. In the section for this conditional zone, we would put a smaller land use table in there and say, these are the uses allowed on this lot. So self-storage facilities, and then you would want to allow all the commercial uses that are allowed in both the C2 and C1. So things like restaurants, retail stores, those are all allowed in both districts. So you would want to keep those allowed going forward. So that way you're allowing the self-storage facility, which isn't necessarily normally allowed in the C2, but you're still allowing some of those small scale commercial uses that are allowed in both districts.
Right now.
Pretty much all the commercial uses allowed in the C2 are also allowed in the C1. So the only thing that you'd be changing is that in the C2, that lot could be redeveloped into a residential property, whereas if it's C1, it won't be able to be residential. But it could still be any number of commercial uses besides self-storage.
Okay, thank you.
And that could always be changed back, amended again. If something came up in the future, that section could just be erased and, changed back to C2, so.
Any other comments, thoughts, questions?
question also that staff needs an answer to is this something that council wants to pursue? So we'll get back in touch with our, the resident and let them know one way or the other.
I'm okay pursuing it personally. I do wonder if we went in this direction, would we want to have the same kind of public hearing notification of adjacent property owners that we would in most zoning changes?
So it's still a zoning change, Tom, so it would still require the public hearing, the notice to property owners, all of
That's
that would
good.
still have to happen.
Yeah, that's good.
Well, I'm actually good with it also. I think this is a good use, yeah, I'm with it also.
I am too.
Same here, yep. Sorry that I kept checking out earlier, by the way. I literally had my Wi-Fi cut today by a contractor accident. So I'm back.
So they say.
Yeah, yeah. Right.
Anything else from anybody? Okay, so moving on to our next item, number 4. We're gonna have a brief community development update since we have not been connected with community development of all the going-ons in the town. Dave's gonna take a few moments here to kind of get us up to date.
Before I start, well, he actually, he was faster than I thought. I wanted to say something before Kyle got off. I'd like to, with your permission, I'd like to just take a couple of seconds to say, I sat and watched Kyle as he's talking throughout both of these presentations that he's done today. I can tell you the planner that this young guy is becoming is amazing. And I can't think of I mean, I was so proud of him just watching him do this. The planner he's becoming is amazing. I can't think of anyone that I would rather have to be working with as a planner. He is just rocking my socks when it comes to work he's doing. I mean, so I want the council to know, you know, he was a young planner coming in. He had great mentorship with Evan, and he's had the support and from staff, and he really is doing an awesome job. And like I said, I'm very, very proud of him. So that being said, I apologize for taking up your time, but it was just, parents' pride was just jumping out.
We always like to hear good things, Dave.
Definitely.
So now getting back to mine, Sophie had asked me to give an overview of in community development. So I'm going down through your agenda and talk about the general economic overview. What I'm finding right now, I've had several of these conversations with staff and other organizations outside of the town of Orono. This is a really weird time because I can't tell you a time in my career of over 40 years. I can't think of a time where the economy is doing what it is today. And that, when I say that, we have a really robust economy happening in the middle of a public health pandemic. So we're having issues. There are businesses that are really struggling with things dealing directly with COVID-19 because of the business. You know, the eateries, the lodging facilities, and such. Some of them are really taking it, you know, on the chin. But there are other businesses out there that have just, their sales are screaming high. And we had a conversation, Mitch and I had a conversation with a local businessman who was thinking about retiring, and his business in the last 6 months has taken off so much that he said, well, I guess I'm going to be around for a while. because business just seems to be really cranking. So it's really hard to be sitting in one meeting talking about how are we going to encourage people to be wearing masks, and how do we social distance, and how do restaurants deal with this, and how do hotels deal with that, and we're finding solutions, while at the same time we have relatively low interest rates. I have folks who said, look, I'm looking for a place to invest. I want to be able to I need to put my money somewhere. And so I'm getting regular phone calls from folks who are looking for space, looking for places to grow, expand, or locate their business. There's buildings like Friend and Friend. I bet I've had 5 different companies that have contacted me looking for information on the Friend and Friend building. And the realtor has told me twice that he had it under contract. So there's things that are happening. There are people that are certainly interested. So I spend a lot of time providing data for them to be able to support those decisions. Even the Next Links building, I mean, I really feel bad for Larry as the owner, because it's been sitting there empty for this long. But we continue to have interest in it, and we have continued to have people saying, hey, that would be perfect for what we're doing. And then you work on it for a month or two, and then it just kind of, moves its way. But that's what happens in economic development. So I would say that we are, I was listening to, some of you may or may listen to a Zoom meeting yesterday by the Chamber of Commerce put on that Tracy Witten was one of the speakers. Of course, one of the things I liked about it was that one of the first things she did was highlight how helpful the town of Orono has been to her, and all of the issues that she was dealing with around COVID-19, that the town was there, not only the town's people, but the town as an entity, the fire department, the community development office. We were there to help her. So I was very appreciative of her over those kind words that she shared globally. But what she was saying is that some things, some part of her businesses are really difficult, but a lot of her weddings, I was surprised, maybe because it was 40 years ago when I got married, but I was surprised that how many weddings that folks have just simply postponing them until next year. Not sure my wife would agree with that one 40 years ago, but maybe it would have been under these circumstances. But anyway, her said a lot of her business is off here, but she said, if I can just get to 21, my business looks like it's going to go right back up again. So that seemed to be very positive. As I said, we've been working with her, trying to figure out how to reinvent, how to do things different, how to pivot. Restaurants, again, I've been extremely proud of a couple of restaurants specifically that have done a great job pivoting, saying we used to do business this way, now we're doing business this way, and they're able to succeed. One of the challenges that I've heard from several businesses is that the monies that are being given out to folks who are on, that have been unemployment, that it isn't making it very lucrative for them to come back to work. And so they're really struggling with trying to find employees when they actually need them, because these folks are saying, gee, quite frankly, I can make more money staying home than if I go back to work. So there's that balance that I think that we look at as, when you're looking at services and bailouts and such. There's always a yin to a yang and an up to a down. So those are the kind of things that I think that are happening. Rental properties, we've been meeting. We've had conversations. Sophie had spearheaded the conversations with what we call the big three. They're all full. As of when they told us yesterday, they're all full for this year. We had a new employee here for the town that was looking for she wants to be able to live here in Orono. It took us some favors to get an apartment for her because everybody was full. So my conversations that I've been having with the rentals, whether they're 1 and 2 family places or the big 3, I think everybody is nervous about what's happening at UMaine. The one thing I will say that for the first time since I've been here, I feel that UMaine is finally understanding how they impact the community around them, that there is a community outside their island, and that what happens with them really makes a difference as to what happens outside of their island. And they've been very supportive and very helpful and very interactive. And again, I'll defer to Sophie to go on longer with that. But I would just say that those things seem to be working real well. As I said, the buildings that come available, most of them get filled fairly quickly. So from a 30,000 square foot elevation, I think that the town overall, the economy is guarded. It's good, but guarded. Everyone is sort of holding a breath to see what happens, whether the university is going to be, is going to open as they think they're going to, and what the implications from that might, if they don't. So I think people are certainly, they're not afraid to invest. They're interested in investing, and they like what they're seeing in Orono, is what the word I'm getting. Quickly, I'm going down there because I've got my watch going here. The revolving loan program that we talked about, interesting program is that when we look to creating this loan guarantee program, remember that it was before things like the PPP program and other federal and state benefits. Recently, the round 2 of the PPP came out when we were just getting ready to discuss using this program. And in the new PPP program, the feds have reduced the percentage of the monies that you get that have to go towards wages. It used to be 75% of the money that you got had to go to wages to encourage people to keep their employees on staff. Under the round 2 version that just came out last month, that's been reduced to 50%. So that means 50% of the monies can be used for something other than payroll. So it can be used for the cost of operating a business. The reason why that's important is that these funds are scheduled to be forgivable. So pretty difficult for any of the banks, any of the lending organizations to compete with a program that says, hey, I can give you, $50,000, and if you do all these rules, you're not going to have to pay it back at all. So that being said, our program, I continue to have conversations with UCU about the program. I've asked them, give me some feedback as to, are you getting applicants coming in that you feel would meet this criteria and meet this need so that it would actually be a benefit? I haven't heard back from that yet, but so I'm waiting to hear that. But it doesn't necessarily surprise me knowing what the competition is for free money. So we have the program there. I will tell you, we haven't implemented it yet simply because we haven't seen the need for it or the meeting the criteria that you have you've outlined. Meaning it's got to be an existing business. They've got to show that they were profitable before COVID, and this was as a result of COVID that they need the funds. But again, let's wait and see how that works out, and we'll work on how it could. If it needs to be tweaked, I'll talk to you about whether it needs to be tweaked. The Envision that TIF renewal. I'm sorry.
So you've had no takers. Yeah, the question is, you have had no takers so far in that?
Correct. Because again, there are other alternatives that, quite frankly, are more profit, more amicable to them. They don't, if I can get you a forgivable loan, why do I want one that I have to pay back? The EnvisionNet renewal, you may remember that this was a 20-year TIF that council had voted to extend it another 10 years. We have been working we've got a conditional approval from the Department of Economic Community Development for the extending it the next 10 years. There was a couple of technical paperwork type things that that we've been working on to get done. I think I have them done today. For example, the original assessor's report saying what the original value of the property was 20 years ago. It was submitted to them as part of the application. DECD accepted it, approved everything. Now that we're going through the review of amending it for another 10 years, they look back on it and said, well, gee, the assessor's paperwork that you sent in 20 years ago was never signed by the assessor. So we've had to try to go back through files 20 years ago to find the original that was actually signed. So it's taken us a little while to just do silly things, I guess, like that. But the good news is we have a conditional approval on it. I'm confident that that we'll meet all those little things that they need, and we'll be able to extend that. Why that's important is those funds, really help towards the infrastructure on Godfrey Drive. I think everybody agrees that this year that is one road that definitely needs to be repaved, and it will be. And so these are the funds that are paying for that project. So it's it'll be helpful for the next 10 years. I'm trying to be brief and get through these, so if you've got questions, please don't hesitate to interrupt. The Penobscot Street, the former town garage, or as I like to kid with the folks here, we keep talking about the old town garage, and I said, well, we don't deal with any town garages in Old Town. But the former town garage here is on Penobscot Street. I have reached out to all of the developers that I know of, looking to see if they'd be interested in the property. And I literally have had 0 takers. Understanding that there's been some parameters that the council has put on of what you want to see there and what you don't want to see there. And so to date, I haven't been very successful, quite frankly, in finding anyone that it's a brownfield site that could be easily remediated, but still it's a brownfield site. And it would, there's certain things that, if you want to use it for student housing, people would use it tomorrow. But the direction I was getting from council was that you didn't really want it to be used for student housing.
Are there other sort of categories that people have contacted you about? I mean, just out of curiosity, we put these parameters up, but if we have something that gets kind of close to the fence. Because of the building, Sam, it could vary. We've been approached by folks who have a earth contracting business. They would like to use it as basically as what the town garage was used for as a private business. And so if you think of it as what the town garage was doing, but privately, so those are definitely there's been interest for that. What I've heard, again, because I wasn't part of the earlier conversations about building the new one, but what I've heard from many different people is that they really they wanted to be able to take the heavy truck traffic through a neighborhood. They didn't want to replace town trucks going up and down through the neighborhood with private dump trucks going up and down the neighborhood. So I heard from the council that previous meetings that you weren't really interested in going in that direction. But those are what I've wanted to do. I've been able to reach out to one of the big box. This property abuts 2 of the big box student rental facilities.
I thought that it might be one of them might be interested in it to use it as a maintenance facility for their complexes. Because neither one of them really have any large maintenance facilities. I've gotten a hold of one of them with no interest. I have not been able to get a hold of the other one. They're in Houston, and I haven't been able to find the right person yet. So I can continue on that. Any other suggestions that you have, Sam, or others, that what that might, what it might look like? Remember that again, there are how it's used. We have a DEP report on, depending on how it's used, will dictate what type of remediation has to happen for the property. If it's used for a single family home, it's much different than if you were using it as a maintenance facility for a housing project.
I've heard as a solar panel array. after we get the solar ordinance.
It could very well. That may be your community, Terry, your community solar garden that municipal, different community members could get with. Plenty of opportunity.
Or those big buildings, or the buildings behind,
Those are certainly opportunities that could. It's not a very big lot, so the larger solar developers they're looking for something in the minimum of 15 to 20 acres. Really, but when they're looking at the larger scale, and more likely they want 30 or 40 acres. So that's a pretty small lot for for that. But it might be something that you folks look at. But that's where my point is, I don't have anybody on a hook waiting to look to hey, if you give me a good deal on this property, I'll build X. I haven't received that yet.
What's the size of the lot?
I don't want to say off the top of my head, Lori. I can get it to you, but I'm going to guess and say a couple acres, or an acre and a half or something. But I will get that information.
I don't need exact, but when you do mention that it's not 20, I'm like, I thought it was way less than 20. So yeah. My mind's in the same ballpark. Okay.
It's a postage stamp by comparable.
Dave, just I think it's best that we also, as these come up and people are interested, if they don't fit in the mold, we should discuss it, because we're not going to want to hang on to it forever, and sometimes we have to make some modifications to look at it. So I appreciate that when these things come up, and knowing who's interested and what we can do. So thank you. Okay,
I can do that. Give you some code enforcement investigation, just some updates, because some things that have been going on. The Bill's been very busy. We're trying to rectify a complaint that he's been working on. We started it when we were out working from home with COVID for a property owner who had illegally buried some solid waste on their property. I say this it's a good thing here, because if the public is listening, many people don't know that our ordinance says in Orono that the only way you can get rid of solid waste is by disposing it at through the town. Is that you can't take a refrigerator and take it to Bradley. Is that you've got to, if there's one way to do that, and that's to get rid of it stuff through the town. In this particular case, property owner tried to bury some engines and air conditioner units and stuff that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been buried. And to add insult to injury, where those items were buried was actually in the Aquifer Overlay District. So if you're going to bury something, probably putting it where the water is coming from is not the best place. It's been cleaned up. They have removed all of the things, and we're just going through the legal aspects of what the penalties are for it. There's another property that has a pretty large scale, a lot of development that was going on, again, during the COVID time, that was buildings that was being expanded without a permit. We've had dealings with the owner before, has prior convictions for building without a permit. So this one is going to be, probably a lot more expensive than what the previous mistakes have been, because this person has been, pretty deliberately, disobeying the rules and kind of just doing what they want. But again, both Rob St. Louis as the life safety inspector, who was awesome, and Bill, they've been working on that together to see what the ramifications are, whether theoretically by our ordinances and by state statute, they could literally have them tear out everything that was put in so that they could inspect it and turn around and have to have them rebuild it afterwards, which would, in this case, would be in the tens of thousands of dollars of costs. So again, we're working on those. The project updates, the two big ones. This is going to be a busy summer for us. The UMaines Engineering Building has they've broken ground for that. So again, that's a $35-40 million building. That is a huge project. So we have we've asked that that the university contract are they're paying for, they don't pay for permits in Orono, but they have agreed to pay for a third-party inspector to do the plumbing inspections. Felt that Bill can handle all of, if someone else were taking care of the plumbing inspections, he'd be able to take care of the other, the building and electrical inspections are done by the state anyway on the university property. So he could handle that. In addition, with the RSU building, you may have seen or heard that again is in breaking ground. We've been working with their contractors, with their staff and engineering staff to help them build. We made an agreement again because they don't pay they're not paying a permit fee, which would normally pay for a third-party inspector if we couldn't handle it. What we've done is that we have agreed that that they get a number of hours each week of Bill's time, and they give us notice a week at a time when they need their inspections done. We're hoping that that's going to work out okay. And in addition to all of the other duties that he's been doing. So we've been very busy on projects, and we're continuing to work our way. I know Bill will be happy when the next year is over, because these projects are really going to take their toll. Be ready. I've gone over by 3 or 4 minutes, so if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Don't let it happen again, Dave. Does anybody have any questions for Dave?
Thanks for the update. Good to be reminded of everything that's happening.
I have just one question. You mentioned that you had a new employee and there was no place for them to live, and you had to do a lot of help with getting that person in place to live. Is there any movement on anyone interested in building in Orono?
No, and that doesn't surprise me, Lori. I wouldn't be real interested in it right now because there's so many unknowns. I mean, that's a pretty, are you talking about for residential or for rental properties?
Someone told me there was a house for sale on Main Street, and in 2 days they had 7 offers. They were all over the asking price.
Right.
And housing is very tight, and that's for people who have the money to spend for a $200,000 plus or maybe $300,000 house. So as for housing, it's a price point for more entry level. We don't have much, and I don't know how we're going to get that. And I was wondering if you had any ideas.
I think that my plan is to, if we can get through this first semester at the university, I wonder if there would be some ideas. There is a large scale housing complex that is permitted, that's been through the planning board, is waiting to go. the owner of it simply has held off because they didn't know what the impact was going to be from with the new building of the avenue. And so I would say now that we're 3.5, 4 years after the opening of the avenue, we're seeing all of them filled, that it's telling me that the demand is still there, that they haven't maxed out on that. And I think people are, again, waiting to see, are you going to want to go out and spend, even if it's $500,000 to anywhere to $40 million if you don't know whether the university is going to open or not. I think it's, we're guardedly optimistic, but and
So that's-
whether it's for student housing or for non-student housing, the concern that you're going to hear from developers is that even though it may not be for student housing, the student housing is going to impact everything else that's going on. It's student housing in Orono is our biggest business. If we're not a mill town, we're not a town with a huge amount of retail, meaning like a Bangor or a Waterville or Augusta. Our niche is our biggest tax market is for rental properties. So I agree with you. I'm hearing all the time that, this is what Cindy wants to hear, is that I hear properties are going on the market and they're getting snatched up really quick. I'm assuming that's what you're hearing as well.
Yes, I was interested we had people, since I've been on council, someone came and asked us that developed an area, meaning put a road in and made lots from what was one big piece of property originally, and then came to us and wanted a tax abatement because they weren't selling, no one was buying them to build on. So that's
right.
One kind of element, the person that takes the land and breaks it into lots. But I want us to have one of those succeed. Obviously, whatever that person did isn't success, but we still have pressure of people wanting single family homes or detached, semi-detached, but not student housing, but for families. And, but I've heard through the grapevine that people don't want to work in Orono because of what happened with the person who was trying to develop Black Bear Heights. But Evan and our town and other towns in the state made a big effort to change that. So I was kind of hoping now that we're through the door with that stamp stuff that we would have more people approaching you about housing.
I think that understand is that even with whether it's commercial or whether it's residential, I can buy a current one even if I'm paying a higher than what you think is a higher than normal price. It's still cheaper than what I can build it for, and so the costs of new construction can be very daunting, and you got timing that goes with it as well. There's a lot of so. I would say, again, we get calls that says, hey, if there's a space that opens up, let me know. Whether it's on a commercial side, if there's an existing building, I'm interested. I said, well, I got land, you can build what you want and have it exactly what you want. I'm not interested in that. So they don't want to go through the cost. And again, I've been working on other projects that, again, quite frankly, is the cost of building it new is significantly higher than what I can buy if they're current inventory. The question is, it's just not available.
So do we have any more project updates to go forward?
I'm good, sir.
Great. Any other additional questions?
I guess I'd like to know how towns incentivize that, because there are other places in Maine where people are building, and so maybe it's because the property values are higher, like Southern Maine, there are people building, but.
Well,
so.
Yeah, and they have that population as well. Understand that, I'm sure you know, is that 70% of the population in the state of Maine is south of Augusta. So they have that population as well. That the supply, the demand is outweighing the supply, and it has to get to another level before it is before that happens. Understand that Webster Point, they had 4 buildings that they weren't able to sell, and they didn't build them at all. They're still empty lots because they couldn't fill them. And those were, meant to do exactly that, smaller professional spaces.
Great. So, hearing nothing additional, Sophie?
So just a couple of updates. First, you know how, Terry, when we first got onto this call, I said Belle had to go home sick and I was going to try to be the techie person, and we've seen some places where I've not done so well. It dawned on me when Dave started his update that I forgot to live stream us on Facebook. So if you get questions, what we'll do is I'll ask Belle to just post the video later.
Works for me.
Would you prefer me just to do it all over again?
No.
Just asking.
Draw a line. We got to draw a line.
So we have the town office cabling project is going to start in earnest tomorrow, and it's starting with coring through cement here. So we have a lot of our staff that put in extra time for the election anyway, but people who have not put 40 hours in yet this week will be either on vacation or working on assigned projects outside the town office tomorrow. So the town office is closed. Just want to give counselors a heads up that at last night's planning board meeting, the planning board has approved the permit to install the antennas within the Methodist Church steeple. So you might get some feedback with that. I would remind you that planning board is separate from town council. There is no appeal to town council. If people wish to appeal it, the appeal goes to Superior Court. So we want to be very careful that we are not representing the town in a way that goes against what the process is. Am I making sense with that? Okay. Dave alluded to the fact that this week we had a meeting with UMaine and the big 3 representatives from the big 3 housing complexes to talk about how we're bringing students back, how we can help each other, what our concerns are. This is going to be a challenge, and we are trying to work our way through it. I would not be surprised if we end up having to reach out to the state for some assistance in terms of some regulatory assistance for Orono. Everybody should have gotten emails or notice that the agenda for the workshop on Monday and the Finance and Operations Committee meeting on Tuesday have been posted. They're out for the world to see, and they are in the drive. I'll be working tomorrow and Saturday on the background for that, and we'll get it out to counselors. Terry, I was hoping you could, well, before you give an update on crosswalks, I just want to let you know that we've had a couple of citizens expressing concern about some of the activities that the town is supporting around LGBTQ plus initiatives. And I have been sending back emails. I'm not sending them out to everybody, but I would just say that the tone I'm giving is one of everybody has the right to their own personal beliefs, but this is what the town council has said is the town's belief, and this is why. And oh, by the way, if you don't like our drag story time, you don't have to watch it. You all just got one from a citizen asking about our sculptures, which, to answer the question, the sculptures are I have said the sculptures were going to stay through the passport time, so that's like the end of August, I believe. But I don't see that they're causing any harm, and it's supporting something that the town council has made very clear they want to support. So just let you know that I have been fielding some of those comments, and I've been.
Aren't the sculptures on private property too?
Some of them are on town property, but the argument that they're on the sidewalk, the only way we let them go on a sidewalk is if there was still the ADA, 36 inches of clearance to be able to walk around them on the sidewalk. So people who have put the sculptures up worked really hard to ensure that they were not going to cause any hardship in the community in terms of travel or, impeding anything. So, and the last thing that has been on my list of things to do is about the crosswalks, which Terry, you were part of that committee, so I didn't know if you wanted to give an update of where we were.
Yeah, so I will say, to kind of like speak to Sophie's statement first, it is a bit of a difficult thing to navigate when you get a lot of people providing stuff, and when somebody doesn't think you do enough, or you're not doing it quite right, and that comes from every angle. It comes from somebody who's like probably not in tune with it, people who are in tune with it. I just want people to know that you don't have to look any further than a city like South Portland, who mimics what Orono had did for the month of June, is now mimicked most of the state now. So when we hear these things after we put a lot of effort in, it can be a bit disheartening and a little bit difficult to deal with. But I want people to realize that we, as a collective group, did an amazing job, and we're keeping that going. As from the last council meeting, we had to deal with the reality of misinformation, and we had to kind of set a situation straight with crosswalks. So Meg and Sophie and Rob and I met today, Rob Yerksa, about the sidewalks. So what we've got right now is Rob is going to figure out costs, and because we're within a budget. I know that some people know that, we all know we have a budget. There are certain people who want probably 20 sidewalks or intersections painted. That's just not going to fit in our budget. But what we're going to do is we're going to look at first the Pine Street, Main Street section right there, that crosswalk, is that being we decide that is like probably the most heavy traffic spot that will be really recognizable for now. Not that we won't look at an additional one. We're considering another one more over by College Ave side, but and we decided that the 10 color rainbow flag, I guess, if I'm trying to say the best way to say this, is going to be the option that we'd like. In the interim, based on costs, it may be rainbow specific first. But I'm just waiting now from Rob to get us the costs associated with all those colors. Obviously, with the typical rainbow, it's going to be a bit more, or it may appear that it's a bit cheaper, but we don't know. So once Rob gets back to us, and we may do the overlay, Sophie, what do they call that?
So we're looking at two options. One is just paint. And if we just paint it, we're looking at, it was like $370 in paint, and then time and, supplies. When we look at that, Rob's concern is that that's probably only going to last about a month. If you look in a month to 6 weeks, you look at how Bangor's is wearing. So he is actually reaching out. I got confirmation late this afternoon that we have a vendor coming up on Tuesday that's going to look at thermoplastic, which is plastic that actually gets melted onto the street we had our white crosswalks. We did that way a while ago, and they last a lot longer, and it would mean that we'd probably have to do that once every 2 years and maybe touch it up with some paint, but not have that wearing where it gets to the point that it doesn't look good, I think is the concern. But that's about $2,000, which Rob and I think we have found about $2,000 in our budget, his miscellaneous, and between his miscellaneous and my professional services, that we could put towards this project. So the concern that we had was just, we've got the Pride Passport. Am I saying that right, Terry? Pride
Yes.
Passport.
Yep.
Coming out the month of the month of August. And so we really wanted something down for the beginning of August. What we might end up with is painting and then coming back and a little bit later looking at the thermoplastic. So I think Rob's preference would be if we could get it done and not be constantly pulled back to deal with a fading crosswalk that people aren't happy with. And as he says, he's quite sure people will be fine with it to get painted when we first do it. And then as it fades, gets worn, people are going to want it to be touched up. It's right in the middle of town. So that's kind of where we are at this moment. Does that sound right, Terry?
Yeah, I think that I want to kind of reiterate to the public also is that when once again, like I just said before, we were recognized as the community, and I'm gonna throw it a prop to Meg for taking that project and running with it when everybody had like ideas but no one did it. Orono made the news many times, and so also Portland, like I said, Portland took a lot of what we've done. Now communities are actually finding animals that they're going to choose as their town animal to do the same thing. So Orono, if you hear anybody say Orono didn't do enough, I will take offense to that, because I think that Orono did an amazing job and continues to do an amazing job. So it will be there. We're just trying to figure out if that plastic kind of overlay can get done in the month of August. So Rob's going to let us know. And furthermore, I want to thank the counselors yesterday for taking time to come and do the photo op for the passport, which is going to be a big thing in Maine. So yes, that's where we're at with that.
Terry, real quick, I wasn't in on that committee meeting at all, but I did know a lot of the community members who were really instrumental, and I really want to give shout out also, because I know Meg did a lot, but it's like, no, I don't think any of this would have happened without Ash Carterns and Cammie Carter and John Hawley. They created and came up with the idea. Well, there were some 6-year-olds that came up with the ideas for what animals, but they did that. And yeah. So, I mean, I think we as a council did a great job supporting that, but ultimately, I don't think half of this would have happened if it wasn't for these members of the community. And there are many, many more too that I didn't even mention. But the flags, let's remember, those flags were paid for by donations from 13 families who wanted to support that. I mean, I think we came up with possibly some money, except a little bit after they talk about taking the ball and running. And so it was,
Sophie was the one who came up with the idea of talking to the university about the flags, putting them up on the bridge.
Sure, no, absolutely. But it's just like
those community members suggested some kind of wooden things on the bridge, which wasn't going to work.
Yeah, well, there are a lot of ideas being bandied about, but I mean, like the flags were paid for by the community members, and within, I think 90 minutes. So I just want to make sure when we say it was Orono, man, it was all of Orono. It was, well, with the exception of the people who want to take the sculptures down now, but just shout out to them. So I just want to make sure that for the record, incredible gratitude for that with all those people. So thank you.
Thank you, Sam.
And Sophie, can I just ask one more question before we adjourn? And this is about the COVID-19 cases in Orono. People are talking about maybe getting Jeff back up again and talking about the health issues in Orono, because I know that there's been, I don't know if they're rumors, but I heard that there were 8 cases 8 positive cases in Orono, and we really haven't heard anything much about that, but I think people are talking about it.
So I will tell you, the answer is we can get Jeff to get up and talk about whatever you would like. So I'm happy to do that. It will be a few days. He is not available for a few days, but when he gets back, we can absolutely do that.
Or maybe at our maybe at our next meeting or something, but
Sure.
just to keep, you know,
Yeah.
the anxiety level down a little bit.
So a couple of things. The first one is talking with, so Rob St. Louis is really our liaison with the university, with the housing complexes, and with Maine CDC about the COVID-19 pieces. And
Okay.
he has been doing an amazing job. He just likes it. He likes that Jeff is the one that has to get up and talk about it, is the way that works. But one of the things that we learned that surprised us is that we're not necessarily going to know if we will learn if we transport somebody who has COVID-19, because the Ryan, don't remember his last name, Act requires that first responders get notified if they are with somebody that has a contagion.
Right.
So the Ryan White Act, there we go. So I can't tell you if we have 8 cases. I can't tell you if we have 80. We can go online and look at the website. But so that's
Right.
that's part of the issue is at this particular moment, I don't have any more information than anybody else does. There was a piece in the New York Times that talked about college communities being the most vulnerable when it comes to the spread of COVID-19. So I think one of the messages we really have to get out to people is that we need people to be proactive. We don't know who is coming in that is sick, and quite honestly, it is as much their community as it is our community, and I think some people can forget that. The other piece that's important to understand is the last documents I saw had the 18 to 25 or 30 range, the highest level of asymptomatic cases that they have found. So I think that we all need to kind of be concerned. And so that's my way of saying, yes, I think we should have him come up, but also we don't have the level of protection that I think people believe we do. And Cindy, when she looks in her inbox, just got an email from somebody who wants us to look at wearing masks, and we don't have the ability to push that. I do think that there is probably a good high likelihood that Governor Mills, with her next order or upcoming order, might look at the university communities as getting the requirement that you wear masks and require businesses to enforce that, simply because that is as dangerous as tourists coming into coastal Maine.
Right.
Did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, I've been out and about, and I've been talking to people who have been concerned and have been asking about the cases. And I don't know if it was reported somewhere. Somebody emailed me and said, and I'm not going to say where, but I mean, and said that, you know, there were 8 positive cases in Orono right now. And I couldn't respond to that. And why don't we have something on the website and that kind of thing. This is just these are verbal exchanges. There wasn't anything but sure. I know that there's an anxiety level out there right now. And I don't know how to quell that or how to, you know, ameliorate that without, you know, I don't know. I don't know what to say when I hear, you know, when I hear things like that. So I don't know. Yeah.
But I recommend that you, I don't know if you follow him, but Dr. Shaw really does an amazing job.
Oh, yeah. No, I
Yeah.
do. This is more concern about Orono, not about the
There's
city.
only been like, Maine is one of 2 states that continually keeps going down. And
Yeah.
as I look at it, it's only like, I think yesterday was 6 cases. Before that was like 8. So I'm not, yeah, if you could actually, I think you could actually get a hold of Dr. Shaw and he may give you some additional information on that. So Sophie, did you have anything additional? Nope. Anybody else have anything before we kind of say goodbye for the night?
I guess just echoing what Cheryl said, I hadn't thought to mention it, but I had 3 conversations today with people who were wanted to know what the town was doing about the fact that people would be coming to bring their children from all over. That's a standard thing in the fall, that people drive in from all over and they're here. And I said, I hadn't thought of it. It's the summer. I wasn't thinking about college. I have 2 kids that are college age, but when I had it 3 times in one day, I thought,
Really?
wow. Yes, that people are concerned about that Orono will be a hot
Oh,
coming from away. So I just, I
okay, yeah.
don't do, but I just thought I mentioned it since she mentioned what she heard from people who were concerned today.
Hearing nothing else, I'll say goodbye to everybody. Everybody have a great evening.
Bye.
All right, have a good weekend.
Good job, Terry.
Good
Thank you.
job, Terry.
Great job, Terry.
Thank you.
Ooh, awesome job, Terry.
Thanks.